Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a potential possible Donald Trump landslide in the upcoming 2024 presidential election versus incumbent President Joe Biden. But before we get started, make sure you guys are subscribed and click the bell so you don't miss out on any of my content. Also, we have memberships. If you are interested, you can find a link to that in the description section. Now back to the topic of today's video. I'm going to be filling out the 2024 election map based off if Donald Trump has an electoral landslide, basically his best case scenario. This would actually be more than his best case scenario because, in my opinion, he can't pass 313 electoral votes in his best case. So this could potentially be over 320 electoral votes. So Donald Trump's landslide would be better than his best case scenario, in my opinion. So let's start off by filling some of these states. Right off the bat, states that were likely back in 2020 for Trump would become safe in the 2024 election. For example, Texas. Donald Trump would win that by 10%, and some polls are showing exactly that if he were to have a landslide scenario. And same as for Florida. This state has shifted too far to the right for Democrats to overcome at this point. The Democratic Party in Florida is just an utter disaster and failure. It's just, shifted too far to the right, and this state ultimately abandoned the Democratic Party. You take a look at Hispanics are shifting to the right, and trends in recent shifts are heavily favoring Republicans in the state of Florida. Even Miami-Dade County just went to Biden back in 2020, and it flipped to Ron DeSantis in the 2022 midterms. So if that's the case, then Florida will become safe for Donald Trump. And then even states like Oregon, New Jersey, or Washington State, and even New York, for example, so typically Democratic strongholds or solid blue states would become likely for Joe Biden because Donald Trump would do so well with the popular vote nationwide. He would just have an electoral landslide. So Washington State would be likely. Oregon would even be in the likely column somewhere in between 7 to 10 percentage points. And then New Jersey, Trump had a rally in there. He got roughly 100,000 people to show up. And I understand not all of them are from New Jersey. Some are even from Pennsylvania, which would be good for him in that state. But New Jersey actually would be in the lean column for Joe Biden, not just a likely column or even safe. It would become lean, and recent polling has shown that Biden's lead in this state has only been somewhere in between 5 to 7%, which is bad for him considering that he won this state by over 10 points, double digits back in 2020 by 15 points, and now he's only winning it by 5, 6, or even 7 points, which is what some polls are showing on 538. That is not good news for Joe Biden. And you take a look at these numbers. Donald Trump is leading nationally by almost a percentage point, and 538 accurately predicted the winner of the popular vote back in the 2022 midterms. And if that's the case, then Donald Trump may very well be on track to win the popular vote, as he is winning it. And you take a look at Biden's approval rating, it's just an utter disaster. He's below 40%, currently at 39%. And this is not an outlier. This is very consistent. He's always been below 40%. For the past year now, he's at 39% and has been like this for months. This is not a one-time thing. This is very consistent, and people disapprove of him, whether you're on the left, the right, moderate, independent, it does not matter. A lot of people do not favor Joe Biden, and he's underwater by a net negative 17 points. He's disapproved of by 56%. This is not good news for an incumbent. And even back in this point in time, back in 2020, Donald Trump had a higher approval rating. I believe he was sitting at a 43%, and Joe Biden is below 40%. That is just disastrous for Joe Biden. And then even states like Iowa would be considered in the safe column for Donald Trump. He's going to win that by double digits, over 10 percentage points. Republicans have gained tremendously in terms of new registered voters. And then even in Ohio, Donald Trump would win that, you could say, by 10 points, which would be safe in my opinion. I also think New York would be considered likely for Joe Biden. This is a state that he easily won back in 2020 by over 20 percentage points, I believe 25%. And considering that a whole lot of polls, not one, not two, but more than that, polls show that it's going to be within single digits. Biden's only winning this state on average by 9 to 10%, which you could say that's a good margin. But considering that it is a solid Democratic state typically, and it went to Biden by over 20 points in the election, and recent polling suggests that's going to be decided within 9 to 10%, yeah, that is not good news for Joe Biden. And you take a look at the 2022 midterms. Lee Zeldin came within 5 to 6 points of almost actually winning the state, and he almost defeated Kathy Hochul, which is now the governor of New York. And so considering that, Trump's going to have a rally in the Bronx. And if he can swing a lot of these counties towards the right, then I think statewide in New York as a whole, Trump can perform very well in the state. But even in a landslide or Trump's best case scenario, I still don't see it going to Trump. I think Biden should likely win that by 7 to 10% in Trump's landslide victory. Keep in mind, a landslide victory for Trump is better than his best case scenario. In his best case, I have him getting 313 electoral votes, while on a landslide victory, he can very well pass 320 electoral votes. And you take a look at Joe Biden's job approval on some of these key issues important that matters to voters in a lot of these swing states. For example, the economy, in which Biden is underwater by a net negative of 18 points on this issue. Meanwhile, he's disapproved of by 58%. That is not good news for Joe Biden. And now you take a look at some of these other issues. For example, foreign policy. That's even worse. He's underwater by a net negative 25 points. He's only approved of by 35.5%, and he's disapproved of by a staggering 60% on the issue of foreign policy. And that is not good news. And it gets even worse from here. You thought 25% was bad? He's underwater on the issue of immigration by a net negative 29 points, almost. He's disapproved of by 62%. And he's only approved of by 39% on the issue of immigration. That is actually the number one issue he's struggling on the most out of any other. And when it comes to some of these border states, like Arizona, it can play a crucial role in the 2024 election. And even in Georgia, you saw what happened with Laken Riley. Yeah, that is not good news. And matter of fact, I think in Trump's landslide scenario, he's going to win Georgia by a likely margin of 7 percentage points. And some polls actually have him winning Georgia by 10 points. And highly rated pollsters, these are not bad pollsters. For example, Siena College and the New York Times. Those are accurate pollsters. I believe they have an A+ rating on 538.com, and they're very accurate in the 2022 midterms and the 2020 election. So considering he's up by 10 points on very highly rated pollsters in the state of Georgia, that is not good news for Joe Biden. Even a state like North Carolina, I think, would go to Trump by a likely margin in his best case scenario. Obviously, if this was my actual prediction, I would not think that way. But in this scenario in which Trump does have an electoral landslide, winning the popular vote by 2 or maybe even 3%, I think North Carolina would also be likely. Republicans have gained nearly 100,000 new registered voters in this state. So actually, North Carolina is slightly getting redder. If you think that Biden has a shot of winning the state, I just would disagree with you, because when he flipped Georgia and Arizona back in the 2020 election, the one state that Biden did not win out of all the swing states happens to be North Carolina. And that goes to show you how much more red North Carolina is than a state like Georgia or even Arizona is. And at the end of the day, you take a look at more of these issues. Even inflation, like I just mentioned earlier, Biden is disapproved of on this issue by net negative 28 points, just like in immigration. And he only has an approval rating on the issue of inflation by 35 points. And he's disapproved of by 63%. I mean, it just, how bad can it get? How much worse can it get? And in crime, you can argue this is probably better for Joe Biden. But, I mean, it's still down by 14%. Like, if that's his best approval, he's down by 14 points. That's just sad. And then on the issue of, the Israel-Palestinian conflict, he's underwater by a net negative 30%. That is just disastrous for him. And so, at the end of the day, North Carolina polls, Donald Trump is currently winning in this state by nearly 5 percentage points at the end of the day. And then the lean states for Donald Trump in his landslide victory, which would be better than his best case scenario in my opinion, would be Nevada. Arizona would also be lean due to, number one, immigration, the economy, inflation. And by the way, immigration is the number one priority issue to Arizona voters if you take a look at recent polling. And if that's the case, remember, he was underwater on the issue of immigration by a net negative 29 points almost, if you round up. And if that's the case, Arizona would go to Trump in his, landslide victory. Recent polling has Trump up in the state by 5 points. Take a look at this five-way race. Trump is up by almost 6 points on the Real Clear Politics or RCP averages when you factor in third-party candidates and independent candidates like Robert F. Kennedy, Cornel West, Joel Stein. Trump's lead almost goes up to 6 points in the state of Arizona. Keep in mind, folks, this is a state that Biden won back in the 2020 election by under a percentage point. So this state is also more than likely to flip, even though you can argue it is a left trendy state. I'm not going to disagree with that. It is a left trendy state, but still, Trump is on track to win it by 6 points on RCP averages. And keep in mind, RCP is very accurate. And if that is the real numbers on election day, you can very well possibly see a Trump landslide in the 2024 election. Even states like Colorado and New Mexico would be considered in the lean column for Joe Biden. Now, don't get me wrong, Colorado is still a left trendy state, and it's a very blue state, as Democrats have gained 4,000 new voters in terms of registration. And so you can see these trends that Colorado is getting more bluer than it already is. I'm not going to, doubt that. And so even if Trump has an electoral landslide, I still don't see him winning Colorado. I just don't see him having a pathway in a state like New Mexico. I'm just going to be honest. I mean, Trump can get 330 electoral votes, but still, he's not going to win New Mexico. I just don't see it, and he's not going to win Colorado. I just think those states are too blue, and Republicans have been hyped time and time again. They keep thinking that they can do well in New Mexico and get it within 1 to 2 points. That's not reality. They fall short, and Biden actually comfortably won it back in 2020. So considering that, I think New Mexico and Colorado would be lean for Biden, even in Trump's landslide scenario. And then a state like Virginia, I also think, would go to Biden by roughly 3%, or maybe even 1 to 2% on average. And considering that the governor here, Glenn Youngkin, endorsed Donald Trump, who's very popular, I think that can sway the race in favor of the former president. And if that's the case, then I think Virginia could be decided within 1 to 2 percentage points. But still, at the end of the day, it's just not going to be enough for Trump to overcome, as this state went to Biden by 10 points back in the 2020 election. Don't get me wrong, it's going to be way closer than where it was in 2020. But still, I just can't see Trump winning a state like Virginia, even if he gets a landslide. And then I think states like Wisconsin would be lean for Donald Trump, and his landslide scenario, he'll probably win the state by roughly 3%. And keep in mind, this state underestimated Trump back in the 2020 election by 6 points. And if that's the case, you apply that polling error, Trump actually wins Wisconsin by 5 points at the end of the day. And then even a state like Michigan would be in the lean column for Donald Trump. Recent polling has shown very good news for the former president, considering that 100,000 people voted uncommitted in the Democratic primaries. That alone could sway the race in favor of Donald Trump. And then as for Pennsylvania, Biden's own home state, he is trailing Donald Trump. Trump is up by 2.5% on RCP averages, with all the third-party candidates included, Kennedy, West, and Stein. And this is not good news for Joe Biden, considering that he grew up in this state and he thinks he has a lot of name recognition in this state, and he thinks that he can connect with some of these Pennsylvania voters. Well, if you think that's the case, polls suggest otherwise, as Trump is winning this state by a lean margin. And if he were to have an electoral landslide, I can tell you for sure he's going to win this state by 3% in 2024 in a landslide scenario. And then even in a state like New Hampshire, Trump almost came close to winning the state in 2016. Hillary Clinton only won it by, I believe, 1%, or maybe it was even closer than that. And so if you were to get an electoral landslide, I think Trump would nearly be the victor in New Hampshire by a tilt margin. It will be extremely close by under percentage point. And we forgot to fill out the districts up in Nebraska and Maine. Nebraska's second. It should go to Biden in a regular prediction, but because this is Trump's landslide, he's barely going to win it by a tilt margin. Keep in mind, Nebraska's second went to Biden back in the 2020 election by, I believe, like 7%. And then as for Maine's second, Trump would comfortably win it by over 10 points. And then as for Maine's at-large, this can get really interesting because third-party candidates and independents tend to do well in the state of Maine as a whole. And so if Maine's at-large were to be close, it would probably be because of the large third-party vote share that Kennedy would, do in the state, and would probably go in favor of Donald Trump. But still, Maine's at-large would be lean by, 4% for Joe Biden. And now the last and final state before we end off this, electoral landslide for Donald Trump is Minnesota. And keep in mind, no Republican won this in a long time. Ronald Reagan couldn't even win this. He won every single state besides one, and that one state he did not win was Minnesota. And if that's the case, I honestly think Biden could still win this state in a Trump landslide, but I'm going to give it to Trump narrowly by a tilt margin, probably by under a percentage point at the end of the day. considering that, the uncommitted vote in this state was pretty large. I mean, not as large as Michigan, but still, it was, a big factor in the Democratic primaries. And then you obviously don't have BLM and what happens to George Floyd back in 2020. You don't have that factor. So considering that Joe Biden does not have the BLM momentum in the state of Minnesota that he had back in the 2020 election, he won the state by 7 points. So it can get close. But if this was a regular prediction, I would have Biden winning Minnesota by a lean margin. But because this is an electoral landslide for Trump, I would tell you, if he's lucky, he's going to win Minnesota by a total margin. But obviously, this is not the most realistic scenario. Trump would win at the end of the day with nearly 330 electoral votes, 327 to be exact, to Joe Biden's 211. This would be an electoral nightmare for the entire Democratic Party. Let me know what states you agree with or disagree with in the comment section down below. And don't forget to subscribe as we are approaching 3,000 subscribers. And also click the bell so you don't miss out on any of my content. And one last final reminder is that we have memberships. So if you're interested, you can find a link to that in the description section. Do you think, tell me in the comment section down below, is there going to be an electoral landslide for Donald Trump? Why or why not? Thank you everyone for watching.